So what we're working on today is a kind of dynamic faction territory simulation. So whereby we have this kind of fragment of a map, and we have these little blocks of territory, and we're going to try and simulate how this territory changes hands. And this is kind of a proof of concept for how the multiplayer in Steamhounds might work. So this is kind of you're kind of getting a glimpse into what we're planning for the multiplayer. The idea being that every player picks a faction in the game, and then each bit of territory here will be owned by a particular faction. And then as players win battles, maybe they move over and take over this bit of territory here. And then maybe there's another faction over here somewhere who's maybe there's another faction over here who's spreading their own territory around, and eventually they have some way of like fighting it out, and we're going to try and figure out on stream like how this is going to work. But as players of this faction are winning battles and players of this factions are winning battles, there's going to be some kind of like meter or something which gets pushed, like to the left or to the right, and then the territory will at some point change hands. Yeah, it's great to see you finally live on one of these streams. So right now we're dealing with this kind of annoying bug. So I've spent the last 20 minutes. Yeah, so the actual rules for how the faction changes hands we're really not sure about, and that's something we're going to try and work it out. Maybe it's just like, if blue has this bit of territory, then maybe that just means that, yellow needs to win like 100 battles or 10 battles in order to take it over, and then blue can take it back over by winning 100 battles. Or maybe it's more like a tug of war where they're both like moving a needle, a meter like back and forwards, and something like that. So yeah, we're really not sure how it will work, but it will be players will choose their faction. They'll probably also choose like which place they want to target, right? So if they're the blue faction and they have territory like this, it means that they'll be able to target any of the neighboring spaces in order to expand, right? And if no other faction has that territory, then it'll be quite easy to expand. But if there's another faction here instead, then there's going to be some kind of like hit points or like something which will control like when the territory changes hands. And there's a few competing goals we have here, so we've got to find a system that kind of satisfies all of our requirements. Like one, we want a territory changing hands to be like somewhat of a significant event, so it shouldn't happen every like 2 minutes or something. But at the same time, each individual player should feel like they're really contributing to their faction. Point system. Yeah, that's kind of what we're thinking of. So yeah, maybe if you have like a really dominating victory, that gives you even more points. Yeah, so some kind of point system, but again, there's different ways that could work, right? Like it's like if I own a territory, do my points like help to fend people off, or does territory always like get traded back and forth? And once I've got it, I just have it for as long as it takes the other faction to kind of take it over, and then I need to win it back, because we want it there to be like trading hands, but at the same time we want, does it make sense for, if I'm on the blue faction, instead of choosing to like target my points like here, could I instead put them into like defending this place? Yeah, I don't know. There's all kind of different ways, and like, is it like based on how many points are scored each day? Maybe at the end of the day we kind of had the territories change. Yeah, right. There's different things we want to try out, and what we're going to kind of do today is make a sort of automatic simulation of this, which will just kind of show the map, and these will be kind of colored, and they'll be changing colors as territory changes. We'll have like a load of simulated players kind of thing, and ultimately what I would like to do is they're using like a web-based framework to make this. So ultimately, I kind of think it would be cool to have this as part of our chat overlay, this little simulation, so we can, maybe people in Twitch chat can be picking a faction and then gaining points somehow by participating in some way, and kind of there'll be this other kind of simulation going there. Yeah, so we're trying out all sorts of various ideas there. Okay, so now we finally loaded these pieces of territory. What I kind of want to do next is kind of get the data about these things like into like an array or something, so we can deal with it a bit more sensibly. And I think I'm just going to create some data to hold this. How do we want to do this? So the kind of ID of the territories, we already have this. They're all numbered from 0 to 22 inclusive, so let's just kind of use that as their ID. Let's think about the data we need for each territory. I think what we need to keep track of is essentially, you know, if this is like territory 1 and this is territory 2 and this is territory 3, we're going to need to know what it's connected to, essentially. So like the neighbors. I feel like it will be useful to know like the central point of these if we want to start like drawing arrows and stuff, but we can probably leave that until later. And then later on it's going to be like the points the factions have in that territory and that kind of thing, you know, like who owns it, that kind of thing. So this is what territories are going to have. Factions probably need, let's give them like a name and a color or something. Yeah, right, like maybe it's just an owner and an amount of health, or maybe it's like for like a map, so for each faction how much health or how much influence that each faction has in this area. And I kind of want to try out today different ways of doing this, so I think I'll start with the simplest, which is probably is just like a single health maybe. So, and I'm going to kind of index them by their ID. I think that makes sense. So this is going to take a bit of typing. So let me just move this across. Get rid of this junk. Just gonna add another layer for drawing stuff on. I think what I'll do then is like actually number these so I can have a nicer reference visually for what they are. I'm kind of going to need to put a load of config for like what the numbers are and what connects to what. Zero, 1. Oh. Actually, let's be cleaner with this and put it up here. 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. Now I can kind of read these back off and start populating this. So for example, 0 is connected to 1 and 17, that kind of thing. Just going to paste in all of these. Yeah, so right now these are just going to have IDs, but it would be cool, I think, for them to have actual names down the line. Ultimately, these will represent, so 15th will have 18, 16, 14. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of up to us, like, it could just be like these two, it could also connect to 20. It's just like visually what makes sense. Yeah, I feel like that makes sense. It would connect to like these, like that. Yeah, I mean that's another question, right? Is how many connections should each territory have, and does that affect the gameplay? Like if there are 3 or 2 or like 4 or like 5 on average or something, will that, you know, will that change how people kind of play the faction game? This one's connected to more, so you know maybe it's more valuable, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's like interesting for gameplay. Okay, I think that's probably about right. Okay, so now I feel like we kind of also want to know the central point of these, because yeah, the next step is I kind of want to draw arrows like to show all the connections, but right now I don't have a good way of finding the central point. So each of these images is like a full if I open one of these things, they're just like a full image like that, because I was too lazy to figure out how to position them so that they're the size of the whole map, each of them. So if I want to start drawing arrows and labeling stuff, I will need to at least know like the central point of each of these roughly. I guess I could try and like pull that out of the images, but it would take a bit of time to process the images to pull that out. It's a string of dots connecting the two sides. Yeah, it's something like that. But in any case, I'll need to know still the coordinates of each of these, which I feel like probably needs to be in here somewhere. So I'll probably do that like this, X and Y. Let's go and throw this in each of them. Yeah, that feels sensible to me. So I will throw this into a nicer editor, actually. Now we have yet more kind of manual work to do this. Oh, I did something weird there. I loaded all of those things in. Okay. I think I dragged a whole folder of images and it loaded them all in. Okay, but now I have this. I know that if I like hover over, oh, that won't work. If I hover over, it shows the coordinates of my mouse down here, so I can use that to somewhat efficiently look up all of these coordinates. No, if I could see what I was doing. Okay, what kind of database stuff have you been using? A lot of my professional career before getting into games was, I was a database guy basically for about a decade, so I spent a lot of time doing SQL and that kind of thing. Or you into the more modern stuff like you know, like NoSQL stuff and MongoDB and Firebase and all of that kind of thing? yeah, it's still good. I mean, that's still a useful thing, I think. Got number 22 here. I mean, honestly, a lot of people go for the newer, fancier stuff, but a lot of cases, something like MySQL is still the right tool for the job. And a lot of the world still runs on that kind of thing. Okay, got this stuff finally loaded in. So to verify that we've done this, I think I'm going to draw little circles or something. So this P5.js is very much set up specifically to be convenient for doing this drawing stuff. It's got all of these functions just straight out here for me to use immediately. So I can say I can draw a little ellipse at this position. What I actually want to draw as a circle, so like the kind of width and height of this will be the same. Let's take a look. Okay, I got at least one of these wrong, but we're almost there. Which one was this? 9 should be at 585 by 340. Nice, sweet, we are there. So what I kind of want to draw now is lines or arrows to show these connections. So I think what I will do let's actually do it this way. So this always tripped me up in JavaScript. So this is like a for each loop. But instead of giving me the territories directly, it gives me the index. Like if you have an array as well, it gives you like 0, 1, 2, 3 instead of the actual, whatever you've actually got inside the array. So I believe it's if you say let something in a collection, it gives you the indices, but if you say let something of, it will give me the actual territory objects. But I kind of want the index because I can also look up the images here. What I could also just do is say, just kind of shove an image into the territory objects themselves like that. And then probably just say, like this. I can ditch that. Okay, we now got rid of our image array and we've just shoved. So the other thing you can do with JavaScript is just say, just shove properties inside of stuff. An object is kind of just like a map in something else, right? Like a map key and just like a actual property variable inside the object, kind of just the same thing in JavaScript. So I'm going through the neighbors. Why is this not? Trouble. Yeah, you can tell I'm not a JavaScript programmer because I get mixed up with this stuff. And what I kind of want to do here is draw a line from myself to my neighbor. Should probably say is it stroke weight or stroke width? We shall see. Guessed wrong there. I think an issue here is that I should kind of be drawing these on top of everything else, so we actually loop through again. Yeah, that's right. So you kind of set up, in this case I was drawing a circle, so I set a fill of red and no stroke, so no like outline. And in this case I want a stroke of a certain color, which also kind of, I believe, re-enables the stroke, and then stroke weight to set the kind of thickness. So you kind of, rather than having it as a parameter here, which would be another perfectly sensible way to do it, you kind of set the state up. You set like the pen you're using almost, and then you just draw whatever lines you want. Did not like that. Oh, actually the kind of just the index of the neighbor, right? I still need to look up. The actual neighbor there. Nice. Okay, we have stuff connected as we would expect, I think. I was thinking of, should we have a way to show that these links are going in both ways? I think they probably are. I think it's probably not actually that important. Yeah, so it looks like we've got our kind of data structure set up properly now. And what we've defined here is literally just a graph. So if you ever got into computer science and graph theory, that's exactly what this is. We've got these kind of nodes here and then like links between them, and now we can do fancy graphy stuff. So let's think about adding some more properties into here and starting to add the idea of like factions into these things. So I think what we kind of need to define is like what's the home turf of each of our factions. You know, they all need like a starting point. So if we're going to have 2 factions for now, and I will say the factions we have more fleshed out in Steamhounds right now are the church and the industrialists. So if anyone has a suggestion for where they would like the home base of either or both these factions to be, maybe I'll let you guys decide where we place these. Corners? Corners, yeah, corners are a sensible place. We could literally go 0 and 22, opposite corners. I think, okay, that sounds good to me. So I feel like I should probably define the factions here as well, right? Because they're going to need like a name and a color, and let's literally call them church. As a color. So the churches actually have a kind of green primary color. So let me try and pick these out. Feels appropriate for the church. About 30, 175, 14. Yeah, I think that could work. So I think the way it will happen, so in the main Steamhounds game, it will, the key locations will already be part of the map, right? So, start hiding these. So there may be like certain landmarks which mean that this will always be the home of a certain faction. But if we turn this into a mini game on the Twitch stream or something, then yeah, people could definitely choose their home bases. Yeah, and the way I kind of see this working is that a faction will never be able to lose their like home district, right? So if this is like church faction's home over here, then the industrialists have like an orangey color. And this is their home over here, and those districts will always belong to them, so they can't be completely wiped out because it doesn't really fit into the story of the game that could happen. Yeah, but I like this as kind of starting locations. There's the church. There's the industrialists. What was their color again? Okay. And then I think I'll do this like Maybe not. Let's instead go. What I do want to give these is like a current owner, I think. So again, back here. Which can just be kind of nulled out for now. Another tiny thing, which is really minor but is actually super convenient, is that in JavaScript, I can just have this extra comma here, even though it's the last element of the list. This is something you can't do in JSON, but you can in JavaScript, I believe. It's just so convenient if you're copying and pasting and editing stuff like this. Because you just don't have to worry. You know, the amount of code and stuff that deals with just making sure this extra little comma doesn't appear on the end of a list. It's really kind of annoying. So it's nice to have that dealt with for us. Cool. So I think what I'll do in the setup is I'm going to say go through all the faction names, and then I'll say yeah, right? Like and yeah, and if you're making code that like outputs a list, then you've always got this special case of the last element, and you have to like go and remove it or make sure you don't put it in there in the first place. But yeah, it's just it's really nice. I mean, it annoys me because I like my code to look neat, so I still want to get rid of it, but I do appreciate that it can be there, honestly. Okay, then we're kind of setting the owner there. Then I think what I can do now is when I draw this image, I kind of want to tint it to the owner's color, right? And if anyone who watched the previous streams will know that if I can set the tint like this, or in fact, let's say if tree.owner is null, then I'm going to use this tint function, and I'll just tint it white, maybe grey even. Let's put the opacity down as well. Otherwise, let's tint it with the factions color. In fact, I don't even need to say name. Let's actually put the faction object in there. It's a bit cleaner. Kind of want to see the nice artwork underneath, so I'll do that. I'm just going to run this for fun. It's kind of becoming a running joke at this point. Oop. Oh, that's not right. Yeah, so you'll see what happens is we use the tint function and drew that, and then drew that, and now the tint function carries over to the next run through the loop, and our whole background gets tinted as well. So we need to make sure that we untint everything before we draw this background. Or tint it white is the same thing here as not having it tinted at all. Okay, cool. So we now have our territory kind of defined here, and we're drawing this out. I don't think I always want to show these lines. I kind of want to make that like a debugging function. So what I often like to do is to have like a hey Yita, welcome. How's it going? So what we're doing today is we're working on a kind of awesome. So Yita's been battling with Wikipedia to get our Stray Basilisk Wikipedia article up, apparently. Aladdin, okay. Is this the new Aladdin? How recently was the last Aladdin film made? It was still a few years ago, right? Oh, okay. OG Robin Williams, Genie. Yes, that was quite a performance. Yeah. That is classic. Anyway, yeah, so I feel like I only want to draw these dots if it is. Okay. In like a debug mode, I suppose. Same for these. So Macronario says maybe it only shows flashing a little bit with the neighbor zones, flashing the sensors of the neighbors. Yeah, I'm not quite sure, because I'm picturing this as kind of like a simulation which more or less just like runs itself in the background, so I don't really know what we need to show. Like maybe when territories change hands and stuff, we need to do some animation and stuff, but otherwise, yeah, I'm not sure how to like visualize it. Anita is talking about Mork and Mindy. What is it? Nanu. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I've heard this as well, that he would look up swear words in other languages, and this was like a family friendly like primetime TV show, right? And he would just throw in like some Russian swear words and stuff, and manage to get it in there because he would speak like nonsense as this alien language. It's kind of a legendary thing in TV history. Okay, yeah, so what I think I want to do is have this debug mode and have that toggled whenever a key is pressed. I think my bitrate is okay, Macronario. I mean, it's not running like super smooth. Okay, so now I have this sort of debug view which we can toggle on and off as we have, hidden secret information in there that we need to debug stuff. But for now, we've defined all of these territories. Yeah, so now I guess I can explain to Yuta what we're doing. The idea is that we've defined this map, and this image is just a placeholder, but we're doing a bit of research and development for the Steamhounds multiplayer mode and how that will work. The basic idea being that each player, every few weeks or something, will be able to pick one of the in-game factions to kind of ally themselves with, and then there'll be like a territory map, right? So as you win battles, your faction's territory will grow in some way, and maybe you'll be able to say like, oh, I want to like station myself. If I'm in the green faction, maybe you want to station yourself here, right, to try and take over this neighboring faction. Or maybe if you want to put yourself here. Where it gets interesting is when, let's say you have like a blue faction here and then like a green faction next to it, is how we handle like the battle for territory between these two factions. So maybe if I'm blue, maybe I can put my little flag down here and try and put my effort towards taking them over, or maybe I put my flag down here and put my, any wins I get in ranked matches will go towards defending this territory instead. Or, maybe I'm more interested in expanding into this territory, whatever you decide to do. Yeah, you'll kind of have that. You have that option, and there'll be some choices to make as a player there. So we're kind of making a simulation of how that works now to figure out what makes sense. Okay, so now territory is going to have owners. I feel like we probably also want some concept of like health. Part of me wants to just go through and like align all of these things, but that's not a good use of anyone's time, I don't think, right now. Yeah, so let's throw in some concept of health. I think what I'll do is I'm going to kind of go through each territory and initialize this to 0. Maybe let's not do health, but let's do like the influence of each faction, if that makes sense. So we say start these off at 0. So what we'll end up having effectively is like a, just prevents me having to type it in manually, is like, okay, so the church's influence is like, you know, might be 10. The industrious is like 5 or something, as a way for to have them like battle for control over this faction. So I feel like this is quite flexible, right? Like whether we end up using these like this, you know, if these are like 10 and 5, then it makes me think of like a bar like this, right? Where it's like, you know, 5 and then like 10. And this is like moving back and forwards. So right now, this faction, you know, with 10 influence is like owning the territory. They're like king of the hill. Whereas this other faction is like maybe the underdog. So this is a way we could do it, right? So every time there's a win, this changes, you know, so then maybe this goes to like 6 and this goes down to like 9 or something, and it like pushes this bar forwards. This is a simple way, and maybe this is a good way to start with this. The one issue, I think, is if it's near the middle, then it will literally like flicker back and forth between these two factions, which is maybe not what we want, because it will be too kind of chaotic and unstable. If it was like, maybe it should be more like when a faction wins the territory, the other factions then have to do a bit of work to like grind them down before they can take it over. Or maybe there's like a cooldown or something before it can change hands again. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think this will, in any case, having this sort of data here will allow us to do that. So rather than manually put these all in here, I've just sort of populated that same data in a loop here, so they all start off at 0. Probably except I should you know, set this to like 100 for their home base. So I think that does what we want. Let's try logging out territories. Yeah, right. There's ways we could, so many ways we could do this, which are like subtly different. But I'll probably start with the simplest way I can think of, and then yeah, we can play around and see if that works or not, and try and make it more complicated. Oh. Influence should be influence. Yeah, this is a JavaScript issue, right? Like, it didn't throw me an error here because it doesn't care what these properties are called. You always get a runtime error, whereas in another language it wouldn't even compile properly. This would be like underlined in red, and it would know I made an error. Okay, didn't exactly. Okay, so we now have these So here's territory. Oh. Okay, this console view is not ideal. I wonder if it appears in my actual console. Okay, looks like it does. Yeah, so we have all of these territories. Territory 0 has influence of 100 from the church, 0 from industrialists. The owner is... This is the church object. Okay, that seems to be doing what we would hope. So we're basically at the point now where we can play around with having these start to spread out, right, and sort of conquer more of the city. So it's a simple way to do that, right, is I'm going to create another function, I think, called like expand territory or simulate, which is kind of like a round of the campaign. And I think a simple way to do this is there's so many ways to simulate this, and ultimately I want to have like simulated players with different skill levels, part of different factions and stuff. But a super simple way is just to say each faction's going to like increase its influence by a certain amount in all of its neighbors. So okay, let's think about how we want to do this. So I think one way is to say, okay, if this is my faction down here, and I'm the owner of this, and my influence here is like, my influence here is 100, then what I can do is I can say, look at all the territories which I currently own, and then look at all their neighbors. So that will give me probably this one and this one. And then a simple way to go about it is just to say, hey, every turn I've got like, I don't know, 5 influence to spread over my neighbors or something like that. So, you know, this goes to like 2.5, this goes to like 2.5. So they'll just gradually spread sort of evenly over time. Then at a certain point, you know, this will get to like, this will be at 100, and then it will tick over to being owned by me. Probably by that point this one also is owned by me. And now I'm starting to spread into like all of these neighbors as well. You know, now I'm spread a bit thinner, right? So my 5 points each round now have to be spread between like 4 different things. So yeah, so there are different ways to do it, right? So the simplest way I think is to have them spread evenly and try and conquer like all of their neighbors equally, but they'll be doing it more slowly. Another way is, it's almost like different strategies the faction might have, right? Another way is, oh, they're always going to pick one and like focus that and put all their resources into that. So this is kind of what I want to play around with, is like different factions having different like strategies to try and simulate. Ultimately players, I think, will be deciding this. So a simple way is like, if I'm a player in this faction, then, you know, it will show me the places which are available to me to expand, you know, to put my resources in, right? So it's probably like these 4. And then as a player, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to like put my flag down here. So now whenever I win a battle, I'm going to be like adding a bit of influence into this area. But another player may be putting it here, another player may be putting it here. So probably on average, it's kind of just be spread out. And that's what I'm going to kind of simulate first time around, I think. But maybe all the players of the faction decide, hey, let's not just like randomly each pick wherever we want to put our flags down. Let's all like make a plan to like focus down here, right? So everyone's flag goes here, so they get influence like really quickly in this area, and then they take over this place like super quickly. This is kind of how we want the faction game to play out. So players to have a reason to coordinate and talk amongst themselves and make plans and stuff like that. Yeah, and this is kind of part of that. And yeah, what I want to do with the simulation is try out different strategies, like even strategy versus like focusing down strategy versus some other. Yeah, so you generate influence by winning battles, I think, is probably the way it's going to work. So like this will be your your, not the multiplayer screen of the game, right? And you'll say, okay, first I'm going to put my flag here. Then I'm going to click like matchmake. There'll be the matchmaking button. This is the simplest form it could take. It may be more in depth than this. You know, I click matchmaking, and then based on how well I do in the battle, this territory, which I'd like nominated, gets a bit more, my faction gets a bit more influence over it. So I'm making a choice about where I want to help out my faction to gain territory. You know, and then, you know, maybe eventually this gets taken over. But then, you know, maybe at another time, there's another faction who like owns this neighboring thing. And they're kind of trying to take us over here. So I would have the choice now of, do I want to put my flag down here and try and expand, or do I want to put my flag down like maybe here and try to defend and sort of counteract, that kind of thing. Yeah, Yita. So I think we kind of want this to be in the hands of the players, right? So maybe the players who pick one of the factions do have a certain style of play or a certain like ideology or something like that. And if they pick one like sneaky faction, maybe they want to make an end run for a certain thing. Yeah, and I think, yeah, that's also a really great suggestion. This is kind of like a stretch goal thing for us, or ways we could extend this is, yeah, what if like certain territories are harder to take over, but they're worth more, they're like easier to defend, right? Or maybe they have some other like passive effect or something like that. You know, maybe this faction has like the university, the city's university in it, and if you have this, then it gives you some benefit, some like buff, some passive or something. So the simplest form is just, you just have territories and they're all kind of the same, and you just choose where you want to focus your efforts. But other layers on top of having like landmarks or different territories which are harder to conquer and have different effects and stuff is kind of ways to extend that. So yeah, we're definitely playing around with all of these options, and that's, yeah, literally what I kind of want to play around with today. So if I open this back up, let's call this the like the even spread strategy, maybe. In fact, let's make this into a function here. Even spread strat. And then we'll say something like so this is the first one we'll implement. Let's have both factions just do this first. Yeah, like generating resources and stuff like that. There's so much we can do. We want to kind of figure out what's the minimum that feels good and makes sense, and then what does it make sense for us to add on. So I think what I need to do now is, for all of these, I kind of need to know at least what are my options, right, for like where to kind of put my resources. Yeah, Yita, so we were talking, you and I were talking at some point on Discord about paper prototyping, right? This is the exact kind of thing which we would do paper prototyping for. You could literally set this up as a board game and make like chips and tokens and play out this whole deal with like influence and like health points or like key places. This is a perfect example of the kind of thing which you can do that for. I would, yeah. It's borderline whether it's easier to just write the code for this or whether to do it on paper, but yeah, you could totally make this as like a board game and then try and apply those same principles. So what was I saying? Yeah, okay, so what I need to do now is figure out, turn these off. If I own like these locations, let's not draw it like that. If I own these, then I need to figure out where my neighbors are, right? Which is like this one, this one, this one, and this one. So I kind of need to like loop through all the places I own and then build up a list of all of my neighbors where I can expand into, and that's where I'm gonna, for now, have it just like evenly allocated to resources, but later on maybe there'll be different strategies. So I think what I want to do is say I'm going to loop through every territory, and then I'm going to say if I own this. In fact, it's not done by name, is it? So if I am the owner of this territory, then I kind of need to go through its neighbors here. And what I kind of want here is a list of all of the territory to expand into, if you like. And what I want to say is so there's my neighbor. I'm going to say if I already own that neighbor, then I can't expand into it. So let's kind of skip over it if I already own it. Yeah, Yuta, so I saw that your artist was doing that stream. I didn't have time to check it. I had to. We're having some family over tomorrow for like a social distance barbecue, so I had to go and get ingredients and stuff, and I was running around. That's why the stream started a bit late, but I did mean to check that out. But if there's a VOD of it recorded, then I may check that out at a later time. Okay, so I'm going through every territory that I own. Let's say, let's be more consistent like this. Let's say, so go through every territory that I do own and look at all of its neighbors. If I own its neighbor, I'm going to stop looking because I can't expand into a territory I own already. Maybe when we get towards like defending territories, that will make more sense, but right now we don't want to do that. And then I'm going to say if it's not already in the list of territories, then I want to add it. What is it, append? I'm really not a JavaScript dev, as you can tell. Interesting, no errors so far, so let's actually log out. Make sure I've created the correct list here. You know, we're not even calling this simulate function, so let's do that here. OBS is glitched. It includes, I always forget this. Not append, it's probably like push. So yeah, you can tell I'm not a JavaScript dev, but also if you're used to programming in lots of languages, then picking up a new one, it's just a matter of like, you know, was this append or push? Was this contains or includes? Like that, these are minor sort of details which you can just look up easily. But once you know the general principles, you can make something happen at least. Okay, it seems like, yeah, that seems to make sense, right? That it's, we can like 1, 17, 21, and 11, which I believe 1, 17, 21, oh, get rid of that junk, 21 and 11. Okay, it seems to make sense. So let's think about having it actually begin to expand, right? So we know how many territories there are. We now need to work out how much influence we have like overall, right? So if our total influence gain, we said it would be like 5, right? So again, we will now want to divide that 5 up into all of the places we can expand into, which is just equal to divided by. So we should probably check if this is 0, we want to just not do anything. We get divide by 0 error otherwise. Okay, and now we want to kind of just apply our influence to that territory. I'm going to put that into a function because when we have different strategies, they're going to want to do this as well, and this is where we're going to handle like when it changes ownership. So certain territories, it's going to get influence from a certain faction. Let's just not use the name here. Okay. Every tick. Yeah, draw is, it's named draw, but this is just like every tick. So in P5 you have preload, which is where you load assets. You have setup, which is where you kind of well, set things up. This is where you define the size of the canvas and stuff, and draw is like every tick. And yeah, this is where you also have to put your update code essentially. So we kind of have like update here, and then draw here, more or less. Okay, so what happens when a faction applies some influence to a territory? So the amount of influence is going to be and I think we need a special case where if it's greater than or equal to 100, that's going to be the threshold for like taking over the territory. Otherwise, we're just gonna add it in like that. Okay, I think this will do what we want. I kind of want to add some debug to like label the amount of influence in each territory by each faction. So I think I'm going to update our debug drawing stuff to do that. It's like, I think this will work now, right? Seth Rogen, that's got to be an insult. I used to get Harry Potter, I'll be honest, when I was in school. People used to think I was a Harry Potter lookalike. Probably shouldn't have said that. Okay, so before I run this, let's sort of break down what we're doing here. So we're figuring out like what our options are for expansion. Basically, which territories like are neighbors of territories we already own. And then we kind of evenly spread our influence around kind of evenly there. And then this will say so yeah, so I think if I press play, this may work. I probably got at least one typo. Yep. 142. What's the error here? What a kind of null pointery thing going on here. So yeah, so I think we're only applying 5 implements each frame, right? So each like draw or update for each faction, they're checking their neighbors, and then they're taking this like 5 influence and spreading that over all their neighbors. And then we kind of draw again, and then it goes around again. I wonder if I can debug with this. Probably not, right? Okay. Okay, we're just getting a number, so let's put the actual object in here instead of its ID. I think that will probably do what we need. Dare I click on this? Damn you, Utah. God damn it. Ten for creativity there. Okay, so I think I want to do a bit of debug drawing where I want to label each territory with the sort of implements there. The way I'm going to do this is first of all, I'm going to really like fade this out. Let's just ditch these lines for now. What I kind of want to do is draw a label with the amount of influence on it. So I think the way I'll do this is what I'm kind of trying to do is to add, like, using the factions colors. You know, if the influence is like 10 to one faction and then like 20 to another, I kind of want to just label them like that in their colors. So let me figure out how to do that. So text, and it's going to be like the amount of influence this faction has. It's going to be at enter plus y cursor. I think this will work, and I'm just going to say no stroke. If you have stroke on when you draw text, it can look really weird and ugly. It just works better with fill, and I'll do that with the factions color. This is not the nicest debugging environment. This console's really kind of janky. Oh god, Yuta, dare I look at this? Ah, okay. Keys have to be strings, don't they? Okay. Yeah, I was kind of getting mixed up here by the fact that properties have to be, I was thinking of this like an associative array or a map or a dictionary where the key can be any kind of object, but since it's effectively just a property, it kind of needs to be a string. So JavaScript isn't entirely flexible after all. Okay, okay. Oh. What has my life become? Okay. Faction name. Interesting. Okay. Okay, I've done something weird at some point here. Yeah, so okay, so object is because... Okay, how do I explain this? So I think what's happened is that... where's my other window gone? Ah. I think we end up in a situation where... So if you have an object in JavaScript, and you can put properties in it, right? Like something like that. And that's fine. And then you can access these things in a couple of different ways, right? I can say, so if I say, this is my object O, I can get to this by like O.A, or I can say O A, and they're kind of the same thing. Because in JavaScript, like a property or like a variable inside something is kind of just like, this is the syntax in a lot of other languages for like a key, like a key value store, like a map or something like that. And the problem is, if I have some other object that foo equal, you know, whatever it's got inside there, then I can write stuff into it like foo dot bar equals whatever, or foo bar equals whatever. The problem is when if I say, I want this on screen still. If I say, if I say something like foo O equals 1, 2, 3, whatever, then In a lot of other languages, this would work just fine, because this object would become a key, and then you could look things back up, like using that object, if that makes sense. But really, what happens here is these are converted. These really become like strings, right? Like what's really happening is this is like a string. And you can't just have like an actual object being like the property name or like the key here. So this O gets converted to a string, and you just end up with a string which literally says like object or something like that, because that's like you could just convert like an object to a string. That's what it comes out as. And then this, like literally the string object in square brackets, gets stored as the key. So rather than the actual object becoming the key, the stringified version of that object becomes the key. So it's kind of messy, right? Whereas in something like Java, I could say, some map put foo and then something, and then I could use foo to like pull it back out again, and that would work just fine. But yeah, it's because it converts it to a string. Yeah, that's the issue there. Oh, stuff has happened. Okay, let's restart this. Let's also turn our debug rendering on. You can use O.A, but A is then the actual string A. If you had an object called A, it would not refer to that object. It would become the actual kind of string A. You know what? We are getting somewhere here. I don't know if you can see this super clearly, but these numbers are going up. So the influence is kind of spreading. You can see each tick, it's like 5 influences getting spread over all the neighbors. And now it's getting spread over these neighbors here. So we do, it seems, have a basic version of this working right now. You see, it will kind of get slower as there are more neighbors. That 5 points per tick gets like spread out even more. But it seems to be doing what we expect. So this is probably a good point for a quick 5-minute break. I am an Englishman and I do not have my standard issue cup of tea in front of me, which is probably some kind of legal violation. So I'm going to take 5 minutes and fix that, and then I'll be back after that. Okay, I may even leave this running in the meantime while I'm away. Yeah, right, Yita. Yeah, let's go and get tea, and I'll be back in a few.